Renee Diane Yeargain was a 24-year-old from Torrington, Wyoming. She was the mother of 4 and was 2 weeks from getting married. On August 10th, 2004, Renee stormed out of the house she shared with her fiancé, taking clothes with her and refusing to say where she was headed. 2 days later, Renee's car was found at a rest stop 40 miles away. She was never seen again. I'm Ed Densel, and this is Unfound. In putting this episode together, I suddenly realized something. This is the first case since March 2017, so over a year ago, where I have a male family member as a guest. The last one was Bill Madot, father of David Madot. Yes, that means for the last year you've either heard from female family members or reporters, bloggers, and private investigators who were either female or male. That certainly was not planned. Just kind of worked out that way. I guess we will have some time now to analyze how that streak went for so long. So that's one of the reasons this episode has the title that it does. The other reason is that you, the listeners, are going to have to determine which man you believe more, my guest or Renee Yeargain's fiancé, Josh. Thus we have a he said situation. One says Renee was in an abusive relationship and wanted to move back with her family. The other says the relationship wasn't abusive, and Renee chose to leave everything behind because she didn't want to take care of her children anymore. The tough part? There could be an element of truth in both of their version of events. And now a summary of the case. This is brought to you by my friend Megan Good's site, charlieproject.org. In the year before Renee disappeared, things seemed to finally be going right for her. After some rough late teen years and into her 20s, Renee had gotten her GED and her license to be a tattoo artist. On top of that, she got engaged to a man, Josh Minter, who she had been dating for a couple of years. They were living together and had a son in August of 2003. But on August 10th, 2004, 2 weeks before her wedding, something allegedly snapped for Renee. Josh states that she threw a bunch of her clothes in a grocery bag and took off, refusing to say where she was going. She additionally took her phone, keys, and purse with her checkbook and money inside. She was never seen again. 2 days later, police found her vehicle, a 1987 Subaru station wagon, at the Meridian rest stop 40 miles away, between Torrington and Cheyenne. Everything that Josh said Renee took with her was found in the car. There were no signs of violence. Reports state the Subaru had been there since the day Renee disappeared, August 10th. Authorities have not been able to find anyone who saw the Subaru pull in that day. Complicating the investigation has been Josh's reclusive behavior since 2004. Prank calls made by a woman pretending to be Renee or having spoken with Renee. Renee's alleged history of being bipolar, and the possibility that Renee jumped into a semi-truck with someone at the rest stop to start a new life. Renee's family believes her disappearance involves foul play. The case remains unsolved. The interview for this episode is with her brother, John Yeargain. Unfound news. Work continues behind the scenes on many projects Unfound has on the front burner. Volume 3, it's coming. Contacting other media companies like the Tribune Review, it's happening. Contacting SiriusXM, we're efforting on that. That's how you'd say it if this was government work. Shirts continue to go out for free to all of the guests Unfound has had, and the responses continue to be very positive. Next, something new I may be adding to my plate, as if I need anything more to do. The University of South Florida, which is based in Tampa but has a satellite campus near me, has a variety of criminology courses and a department of criminology. What don't they have? A missing persons course or curriculum. And after a year and a half, all of you surely know that more needs to be done to educate people especially those who want to work in law enforcement, regarding disappearances and how to investigate them. Who better to do that than myself? Finally, please check out my friend Nick's new podcast, Comeback. This is a program devoted exclusively to one of the top 10 best-known missing persons cases of the 21st century, the disappearance of Brian Schaefer. You can find the podcast on iTunes, and I'm sure on most of the apps you use to listen to Unfound. Where you can find Unfound. Unfound is on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, iTunes, Podomatic, Stitcher, Podbean, and Spotify. In particular, please join us on Wednesday nights at 9 p.m. Eastern for the Unfound Facebook Live video show, which is hosted on the Unfound podcast page, not in the private group. You can email the program, unfoundpodcast@gmail.com. The website, unfoundpodcast.com. Please check out the secret Stephen Kocher episode. The website at Trib Total Media, triblive.com/news/unfound. Unfound has Patreon and PayPal accounts. Your contributions provide for many of the items guests have received so far. I cannot thank all of Unfound's supporters enough. Unfound merchandise, Volume 1 and 2 on Amazon in both paperback and ebook form. Let's try to work on getting some great reviews for Volume 2. What do you say? The playing cards. Go to makeplayingcards.com/sell/Unfound podcast. Search for almost all Unfound's cases at unfound-podcast.myshopify.com. This includes the flagship t-shirt, The First Year Cases, that has a collage of everyone from Suzanne Lau to Jennifer Wilkerson in it. Please check it out. And please mention Unfound on all true crime Facebook pages and other websites and forums. Thank you. I'm so happy to have on this episode of Unfound the brother of Renee Yeargain, John Yeargain. John, welcome to Unfound.
Thank you, Ed.
Let's start here. Tell the listeners a little bit about your sister Renee. Maybe first, are you her older brother, younger brother, and how many brothers and sisters do you two have?
I was her younger brother, and there were 5 siblings altogether. Okay. There was my oldest brother, Danny. He's currently a Marine Corps communications technician in Okinawa, Japan. Our family hasn't had contact with him since before I was born.
Oh, my. Okay.
And then we have my sister, Christina. She lives here in Casper, Wyoming. She's married, and she's got a daughter herself. And then Renee was the middle child. And she had, 4 children.
Okay. Right.
And then there's me. I'm a single father. I do have 2 children. Only one of them lives with me. And then we have my youngest brother, Eugene.
Okay. And is there, I guess there's a lot of age disparity between all of you? I mean, let's just put it this way. How many years older was Renee than you?
Renee was 3 years older than me.
Okay. And just so everybody knows, how old was she when she disappeared?
I do believe she was 27.
Okay, so that was 14 years ago, so she'd be in her early 40s now.
Yes, sir, or just about 40.
Okay, great. So tell the listeners a little bit about Renee. What do you remember about her, maybe as kids, her interests? You know, were you too close? How did all of you get along?
Well, as children, we grew up in South Carolina. Our mother was single for many years, and she worked a lot to support us. So it was normally my 2 older sisters raising us, taking care of the household and everything.
Yeah.
We grew up pretty tight, but how children are. Everybody bickers and has their little differences.
What was Renee into? What was her interests in school? Maybe was she into have any hobbies? Maybe play the piano or something like that? Anything like that for Renee, as you remember?
Yeah, throughout school, her big interests were art and music. She loved to listen to music. She was never really music oriented, but she loved listening to music. It was one of her passions, and she was probably one of the most gifted artists I've probably ever seen in my life.
So was she like into drawing or painting or or what was her preference?
Drawings, paintings, anything that had to do with art. She just loved it.
That's
She
interesting.
actually wound up becoming a tattoo artist before she disappeared on us.
That's right. Yeah, and we're going to get into that. That's right. Do you have any, or do you or any of your family members have anything that she created whenever, maybe 20 years ago, she painted or drew?
Unfortunately, no. She had a house fire there in Torrington where she was living at, and most of our family photos and all of her stuff like that was in the house when it caught fire.
Oh my. Yeah, that can happen. You have a house fire. It's amazing. You think about losing the house, but you lose all of those precious mementos too.
Yeah, and
It's
it's
not
rather heartbreaking because she loved her art.
right. And did she graduate high school, or did she go to any higher education? What can you tell
She did
us?
not graduate high school, but she did get her GED.
And when did that happen?
I believe that was just a couple years before she disappeared that she had gotten her GED.
And you had mentioned already that she had some children. Why don't we first talk about the first 3 children that she had? When did that all happen, and what can you tell the listeners about that?
Well, she had gotten pregnant with her first daughter, which was Maya, when she was 17. She had gone down to South Carolina to visit friends and family and wound up getting with the guy, and she wound up pregnant. She had moved back to Wyoming, and she was living at a halfway house. Her daughter was an amazing little girl. She truly was. She had was little Jonathan. She had him, I think it was 2 years after Mariah, and she was only with his dad very briefly. He was a colorful person. I think is about the easiest way to put him.
Okay.
And then we had Angel, which is her second youngest daughter, or her youngest daughter, sorry.
Okay.
And she currently is staying with me.
And that's a new development for you, isn't it?
Yes, sir. She just moved back to Wyoming this past week, and she asked if she could come stay with me and my son, and I gratefully accepted.
Yeah. And how old is Angel?
Angel is 17.
All right. So you have your son, and then she would be your niece in your house.
Yes, sir.
All right, good for you. Good for you. And did she name her son after you? Her son's name is Jonathan. Did she name him after you?
Yes, sir. He is named after me.
Wow, that must have made you feel really special, John.
Oh, it did. It brightened my day up. Me and my sister, we had actually been the closest out of all the siblings.
Wow.
So it was a great pleasure for me to have my nephew named after me.
Were you surprised? Or did she keep that as a secret, or did you know before Jonathan was born that she was going to do that?
No, she wasn't even living in Wyoming at the time when she had gotten pregnant and had him. So when she showed up and introduced little Jonathan, it was just a complete surprise to me.
I would have liked to have been a fly on the wall for that. You must have reacted fairly emotionally to that.
Our family's not exactly the emotional type.
Okay.
We were raised rather conservative about emotions and feelings.
It must have been a happy day for you, though, to know that she could pick any name in the world and she picked yours.
Yeah, I was definitely tickled about it. It made my day.
Okay. You had mentioned that you grew up in South Carolina. At what point did your family move to Wyoming? Because that's where, of course, she disappeared. That's where you live now. How did that all happen?
Well, my father had been or my stepdad, should I say, had been in construction for many years. And the economy down south was starting to go down. Some friends of ours were actually from Wyoming and just moved back up here for work. And my stepdad had gotten the opportunity to get on with the railroad. And so we packed up when I was, I'd say 11 or 12 and moved up here.
It's a big change going from South Carolina. I mean, I've never been to Wyoming, but I know South Carolina fairly well. It's a big change, right?
Oh, it was different between night and day.
Yeah. You go from, the South, southern accents. Of course, you have the ocean right there. Pretty nice summers. You know, you have some winters that can maybe get a little cold in South Carolina. Then you move to Wyoming, which I think is known for its ruggedness. It's one of the least populated states in the United States. Big difference.
Oh, very big difference. Very big.
Mhm. But you stayed there because you obviously live there to this day, so it must be too bad.
It's a beautiful state to live in. Most places you live, the people are pretty amazing to be around. There aren't that many people I'd call or per se bad or anything like that. But it's got its fair share of ups and downs.
Yeah. How do you think Renee reacted to moving? Did she move with the rest of the family, or did she stay there? You told me that she maybe had been in South Carolina when she got pregnant for one of her children. Did she move with the family, or did she stay there?
She had came up with us. She was probably 13 or 14 when we moved up. And she actually moved up first with my mom. And it was me, my oldest sister, my stepdad, and my little baby brother that moved up here afterwards.
Now, she told the listeners that she didn't graduate from high school, and she had her first child when she was 17, and then had a couple more children. Was she working during this time? Or what was she
Yes,
doing?
sir. She had been working off and on different jobs, waitressing, whatever she could do. She was always pretty well determined to do what she could to support her kids.
Now, something else, and we're not going to hit this too hard. And as the listeners know, we're not here to judge people. Okay, we don't do that. The listeners know have been through with this program since the beginning. We cover all sorts of different types of people, walks of life. We don't care about their necessarily their personal lives or anything, but I think that we need to talk about this in Renee's case because this kind of has a good redemption story. But she did get involved with some addictions, I think, early in her life. Let's not,
Yes, sir.
what can you tell the listeners about that? Maybe just to give them a sample of what happened with her, and then we'll move on.
Well, she had never gotten into any hard drugs or anything like that. She was into marijuana and drinking for a while when she was younger. But it never progressed into any of the hard drugs like meth or anything like that that I knew of.
And so that was as far as you believe her maybe addictions or these interests went.
Yeah, as far as I know, no. So I mean, and I had spent a fair amount of time with her in Torrington and Douglas and everything else. So I mean, I'm pretty sure I'd have known because I'm a recovered addict myself.
And you would probably know the signs, right? And you were talking to her during this time when she was doing
Yes.
this. So
Oh yeah.
okay. Now she had these first three children, but it didn't, I guess, work out with that guy whose name is Chris. We're going to talk about him a little later. But
Okay.
let's talk about this other guy who came into her life at some point, and his name is Josh. His name is Josh Minter. Let's just talk in general about him. How did they meet? And when did they start going out? And maybe what did you think of him?
Well, they had met. I'd probably say within 8 months to a year after her fiance died. She had been engaged for I think it was 2 years, and probably like I said, 8 months to a year after he died, she had met Josh, and he had pursued her. From what she had told me, he had pursued her pretty heavily, and they started dating. I would say within 3-4 months after meeting. And my personal impression of him was he's creepy. He's one of them guys that keeps everything about himself secretive, and he has to know everything about everybody else.
And do you even know how they met? Did they meet through a job, or were they introduced through somebody they both knew, or any idea to this day?
I was never really for sure of how they met.
And maybe we should just put this on the record. How did Renee's fiance die?
He had died from a car accident, massive trauma.
Was it an accident, or was somebody going the wrong way on a street, or was the uh, what was the reason for the accident?
From what I had understood, an ex of his had been physically pursuing him, and he had lost control of his vehicle.
Somebody was chasing him, and he lost control.
Yeah. Yes, sir. From what I understood, but I mean, I wasn't living in Torrington at the time, so I don't know the whole story behind all of it.
Okay. Did you and Renee ever have a chance to talk about that? I mean, let's put it this way, how did that affect her?
Oh, it destroyed my sister. That man had done everything for her and her 3 children at that time. I mean, he was supporting, loving, and caring. He provided her with a home, vehicles. I mean, you name it, he gave it to her.
And so so I'm sure that was a big blow to her when
No,
he
it
was
was.
in this.
It destroyed her.
Yeah. And I should say for the listeners, I think maybe that I've read somewhere that it was maybe an ex-girlfriend of his that was following him or something at this time when he wrecked.
Yeah, she had been being harassed by one of his exes, and she had just constantly hounded him. And I guess that day she had been following him literally, and he was trying to evade her.
And he wrecked.
Yeah.
Okay. And so, like you said, about a month or a year later, she meets Josh. They become an item, and you weren't exactly too thrilled with him. Would you say that? Do you have any like holidays together? Maybe 4th of July, anything like that, when your families would get together, anything like that? Time they were doing.
No, for the most part, after them two got together, he basically restrained her from seeing our family.
So she wasn't allowed to have freedom to go to your house or her mother's house or any family members, and he was very controlling, I guess
No.
would be the generic term.
Yes, he was extremely controlling.
Okay. And what kind of family does he come from?
From what I've understood and from what I do know of him and his family, he's a very privileged child. Uh, Growing up, he'd gotten everything just handed to him on a silver platter.
And even if he was controlling how long would you say that they were dating before Renee disappeared?
They were dating. I'd say they were together about 2.5, 3 years.
So maybe they started dating at the beginning of 2002, maybe into 2000, maybe the whole way back into 2001, something like that.
Yeah.
And over that time, even though he was very controlling of her, how many times would you say that you saw them together? When you had a chance to talk to your sister Renee, who you say you were very close to, what did you two talk about? What was going on in the relationship? Would she ever tell you anything about what was going on? Any signs of abuse or violence, anything like that between her and Josh?
Oh yeah, there were constantly signs of abuse. She'd hide her eyes behind big bug eye sunglasses from the black eyes that he'd give her. She'd always wear long sleeve shirts to cover up the bruises on her arms. Wouldn't ever wear shorts because of the bruises on her legs. I mean, he was an extremely aggressive person and controlling at the same time, and it had her in fear.
And did she ever call the police? Did she ever get any protection orders against him, or did she not do anything, to your knowledge?
Um, I know she never did anything. She was too fearful of the kids because he was living in the household.
And she and Josh did end up having a child together.
Yes, sir.
Okay, and when was that child born?
I'm not for sure when little Anthony was born. I do know it was, I'd say, about a year before she disappeared.
So in about August of 2003, and he was about,
Yeah.
like you're saying, a year old when she disappeared. Okay, so maybe we have a relationship. Josh controlling. Renee not allowing her to see her family when she wanted to, maybe being able to call them as much as she'd like. And listeners should know that I have independent confirmation that outside of this conversation with John, that Josh, even before he met Renee, was a little bit of a creepy guy, and that's something that I will talk about in my summation afterwards. So we have these things going on in their relationship, but as far as I understand it, is it true that they were going to be getting married in August, maybe a couple weeks after she disappeared? Is that true?
Yes, sir. They were engaged to be married in August.
And how long had this? Do you have any idea how long this engagement had been going on? Had she sent out any invitations? Were you? I guess I have to ask. Were you and the rest of your family invited to the wedding? Anything like that?
I don't believe we'd gotten any wedding invitations, but I do know they'd been engaged for close to a year.
And so she's in this relationship. Sounds like it might have been abusive. And still, he proposes to her for some reason. Of course, they were going out for 2.5 years, so maybe that makes sense. And she accepts. And
Yes, sir.
do you know if they had made, reservations at a church or at a banquet hall for the reception? Had they gone through with all of those things that I've never been married, but people go through when they're getting married?
To my knowledge, no, they had not. As far as I had known, it was just the proposal, and then I do believe it was my mom's wedding dress that she had got.
And do you think this was going to be something that was going to be held at a church, or was this going to be down at the courthouse?
With how my sister is and how he was, I believe that would have been more of a at a courthouse thing
Okay.
or private with the minister.
Okay. So, just a couple weeks before Renee Yeargain is about to be married, she disappears. What was going on in Renee's life, maybe in those weeks and months before she disappeared? You said that she had got her GED, but you had said that she was going to start, because of her excellent artistic skills, become a tattoo artist. Why don't you tell the listeners a little bit about that and how that relates to those last few months before she disappeared?
Well, she had, like I said, she had always been very interested in art, and she had gone to some schooling and gotten her tattoo licensing. So she was a licensed tattoo artist. She had been working out of Scotts Bluff off and on as an artist, and she was also working as I do believe, an in-home or in-house care for elderly.
And so, tattooed artists, if they have enough business, they can make a decent buck, right?
Oh yeah, they can make really good money.
Yeah, and especially if she's naturally artistic and she's been that way for a long time, those types of people can make, pretty good money. In Wyoming, I don't know how much of a big business is that's going to be since it's not that populated, but it's something, and we know people own their own businesses doing that. So maybe she's striking out on her own, maybe going to own her own business, but she's also going to be getting married. Um, where were you living, and how close did you live to Renee and Josh at this time? And maybe I should ask you this: when was the last time you actually? I know you talked to her much close to her disappearance. When was the last time you saw Renee before she disappeared? How
Um,
close did you live to her?
I had seen her probably that July. I had just left Torrington in July and moved up to Douglas with the rest of my family.
And how was she doing?
Um, she wasn't doing very well. She was actually rather miserable. She would tell me, about the stuff that her boyfriend was doing to her at the time, or fiance, whatever you want to say. And she just was not in a happy place, and she was always fearful.
Now you'd mentioned something earlier as well about this house fire. I know this wasn't close to her time of her disappearance, but it might factor in a way that we'll talk about later. But who was in the house at the time? What exactly happened with this house fire that you described earlier, where she lost all of this stuff?
Well, the house fire had taken place at night, and to all my knowledge, it was just her and the children at the house that night.
And did it destroy the house? Did it flatten it? Of course, they got out alive, but Josh, I guess, was not there. Was he somewhere else? And was the fire investigated?
He wasn't. Josh was not there. The fire was investigated, and the fire department said it was faulty wiring in the ceiling. The house was not leveled or destroyed, but everything within the home was destroyed and unusable.
And so and this is the house that Josh was living in as well.
Yes, sir.
And so they had to move, I guess.
Yes, sir.
All right, and this would have been the house that they were living in, or trailer, apartment, wherever they were living in, when she disappeared. Do you just? I'm going to ask you just an honest question. Anything that you look back now, looking at that fire, anything suspicious about it?
Well, the suspicious part to me was Josh was always had to be home with her and the kids, making sure what she was doing, who she was talking to, and the fact that he just wasn't there magically one evening is just it just doesn't seem right.
Okay, so maybe a little bit of a coincidence, but the fire marshal decided that it was an electrical fire. Was this like an old house? Does it seem odd that something that you'd have electrical fire in this type of house, or was it old enough that something like that could happen?
It was actually a fairly newer house. It wasn't like what Wyoming has a bunch of boom houses, which were made back in the 50s and 60s during the big oil and coal booms.
Mm-hmm.
And this was probably made in mid 90s, early 90s.
So a
So
house in. Mm,
something electrical going screwy like that just doesn't even sound right.
yes. So if this house was built in the early '90s, have electrical fire, let's say roughly 10 years later, not impossible, but fairly rare. And how long was this before she disappeared? How many months, or was it a year, or how long?
It was probably about a year, year and a half.
All right. So we have this fire that where they had to move. They had to move somewhere else after this. She's home with the kids. She and they get out alive. But and the cause was electrical problem. You
Yes,
got to talk to Renee the day before she disappeared. Did you call her? Did she call you? Was this a usual phone call that you two might have had? Looking back at it now, was there anything that maybe the unusual about it, the timing of it, anything like that?
she had called me, and I was living at my mom's house at the time with my mother, and she was calling for my mom, but my mom wasn't there at the time. So I talked with her, and she was asking if she could move back to Douglas, and she started explaining to me that Josh had been beating on her again real bad, and she just didn't want to deal with it anymore, and she wanted to come home with the family. So I had called my mom on my phone and asked her, if it was okay if my sister came back, and she said yes, we have more than enough rooms in our house. Pack the kids up, pack their clothes up, and get up here as soon as you can.
And that was the last conversation that you or your anybody in your, I guess, blood family, genetic family had with her. Okay.
Yes,
All
sir.
right. Had she ever, to your knowledge, ever said this that she was going to move out before? And if this was a volatile relationship, there probably might have been some other times when she thought about this. Had she ever said this to you before? Maybe not, of course, followed through with it, or was this the last time that you and your mother had ever heard her talk like this?
She had actually left Josh a couple of times due to his abuse. They were for short periods because he would just get right back into her life. So I mean, it was 2 3 weeks without him, and then he was back.
So it was kind of an on again, off again relationship that many people get into it from all walks of life. It's almost like an attraction that, not a fatal attraction. I don't want to go that far, but an attraction that is unhealthy.
Yeah, very toxic.
Very toxic. Right. That's a good word. Thank you. So, what is the official story for that next day that Renee disappeared? We're going to go into maybe some of the peculiarities of it, but August 10th, 2004, what allegedly happened?
Well, we had been expecting my sister the night before, and she had never showed up. So we had called the Torrington PD and asked because she wasn't answering her cell phone. And we asked them, and they said they went by the house. And this is, we called them, and then they went and did the investigation thing. But they also told us that they can't make a missing persons report until, 37 hours or something like that's up.
It depends from jurisdiction and state, but at least 24 hours, sure.
Yeah. And so they had gone and talked to Josh, and I guess he had given the police in Torrington a letter, allegedly stating it was from her, stating that she was just up and leaving.
So they went over, and what day was this? So she was supposed to come over actually the night before. She was going, after she talked to you and your mother, she was actually going to drive over there that night. So technically August 9th.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so she doesn't show up. You're thinking maybe, well, maybe she changed her mind. It gets to August 10th, and she still hasn't shown up. And what date and time did the police actually go over there and talk to Josh? Was it August 11th or what?
I'm not for sure on the date. I do believe it was a day that we had called them, but I'm not 100% for sure. This is, I mean, like I said, this is, quite a few years ago.
14 years ago, yes. Yeah, we understand that. Thank you. But probably not August 10th because that wouldn't have hardly been 24 hours yet. So let's say August 11th. So they show up there, and Josh gives them a letter.
Yes, sir.
And it says that she is just taking off. Have you ever seen this letter?
Our family, as far as to my knowledge, we have not physically been shown the letter.
So what did the letter say, and what did Josh say happened, what I guess would now be considered the day before, which is August 10th, the day after she was supposed to go move in with your family? What does he say happened that day?
He had said that she had just thrown some of her stuff in the car and left. And the letter, as far as what the police had mentioned to us, the only thing the letter had said was that she was leaving. And that's as far as we got, since I've never been able to physically see the letter myself.
Have you or anybody in your family ever tried to see the letter? And have the police denied that? Did they lose it? What is the status of that letter right now?
As far as I know, the letter is still in their evidence. We had tried numerous times to talk with the PD and get an understanding of everything, and it was more or less like the police just didn't care.
So we have this letter, and he says that he's claiming that on August 10th, that she got up, wrote this letter, packed everything up in her car, and left. Now, what did she take with her?
From what I understood, she had her tattoo and piercing equipment in the car, her checkbook, her wallet, clothes for her and the kids, and as far as I know, that's all that was in the car.
All right, so the phone, everything else that she would, we usually think of as in the 21st century that people take with them when they go, a cell phone, wallet, money, those were all things that went with her as well.
Yes, sir.
Okay. When did you personally find out that she was missing or that Josh said she took off and left? And we should say that at the time when she left, how many of her children were living with she and Josh?
All four of her kids were living there. She had just gotten, I'd say it was a year and a half, 2 years before that, she had gotten custody of all of her kids back. She had had a number of years where, she wasn't exactly stable, so DFS stepped in. But she had had her kids back for a number of years, and there's just no way she just pack up and leave them kids.
Yeah. So the 3 kids that she had before, and then the one child, the son that she had with Josh, who at that point would have been about a year old. All 4 of those children were there at the house, as was Josh, as was Renee. And he says that August 10th, she just had enough or something happened. Something brought something on, and she packed up her car and left.
Yes, sir.
So I want to ask you that question again then. At what point did you find out that something wasn't right, that she was missing? How did you find out?
We had gotten a call, I do believe it was on the 11th or the 12th, that they had found my sister's car at a rest station between Torrington and Cheyenne.
And what did you think about that when you heard it?
It was the complete opposite of anything I had been told. Because my sister had said she was coming home to Douglas, which is north of Torrington, and Cheyenne is south of Torrington. So it's going complete opposite directions. So that alone just rang different bells.
Just didn't seem right about that.
Yeah, it seemed completely off.
And that was, like you said, on the 12th. This would have been the day after, I guess. I'm guessing that Josh gave the police this letter saying that, she was taking off. Who was the person that was ultimately responsible for filing the missing persons report? For example, the missing persons report that is now on file in March of 2018. Who gave the police that information that now exists in that report?
I think it was the PD or the Highway Patrol that had found her car
Mm-hmm.
because we still hadn't been within the dated range to file a missing persons report.
But was it Josh that actually was the one who filed the missing persons report, or was it you? Was it your mother? Who gave the police the information that they could use to fill out that report? That there was
It would have been my mother.
Okay, so Josh didn't do this.
No, sir, not that I'm aware of.
So 11th, the police show up. He says she left, and then on the 12th, her car is found. Do you know if they were looking for it at the time, or did somebody call it in? Was it like be on the lookout for, or did somebody just happen to accidentally come upon it? How do you remember it
In
now?
Wyoming, state of Wyoming, Highway Patrol, if they think they have an abandoned vehicle, they are required to run the plates on it and everything. And so it had just been passing by a highway patrolman that had found the car.
Where was this car found? You said it was in the opposite direction of where you thought that she was going to be going, which would have been your family's area. Where was the car
Yes,
found? Where was the car found?
it was found at a rest stop in between Cheyenne and Wheatland, Wyoming.
And how would you describe this rest stop, this area of Wyoming? And I think the reason we need to do this is because having never been to Wyoming, I think of it as a very mountainous state with a lot of trees and everything else. This is not that part of Wyoming. This is more in the eastern part.
It's a lot of flats, sagebrush. I mean, there's really no tree for the most part out in the eastern part of Wyoming. It's very barren.
And that's the area where this car was found.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Did you drive out there? Did anybody in your family go out there to check the car out? And why don't you tell the listeners what was found in the car once it was opened up?
Our family did not get a chance to go to the car. The police had impounded it when they found out that she was already attempted to be reported as a missing person. So they had impounded it and towed it back to whatever town they towed it to. And as far as I know, all of her belongings were in the car. Her purse, her ID, her phone, all of her tattoo and piercing equipment, debit card, checkbooks, everything.
And to this day, except for Renee, of course, being still missing, is there anything of her possessions that was never found?
No, sir. Everything was still in the vehicle. Wallet, cash, everything.
Okay. Were there any clothes in the car?
Yes, sir.
Would you say the clothes that it was like she was packing up to just move away or go somewhere, or were they just like a pair of shoes and a shirt or something?
To my knowledge, it was what you're required to take yourself when you're like me myself. I'm recently, had to flee from mine and my own son's safety. And when we fled, it was enough stuff to get by for a week or two. And as far as I understood, that's what was found in her car as far as clothes go.
All right, so maybe she was headed somewhere. Maybe Josh is telling the truth that she packed it up and she took her stuff and she drove in the opposite direction for some reason. We don't know. Lots of unusual stories out there when people go missing, and some of them, of course, appear elsewhere. We even have this story within the last 2 months of a guy who disappeared in the eastern part of the United States and was found in San Francisco. So it's just hard to tell sometimes. Would you say this is a rest stop that people usually think of when they're out on the highway? Like you're on the highway and then you kind of take out like a little bit of an exit to a rest stop, and there's like a building with like a restroom there, something like that. Is that how you would portray this area, or How would you explain it?
Yeah, it's just a highway side rest stop. They'll have a number of rest stalls in it for men and women. They'll have a couple park benches out around the building so people can, get out of their cars and, have a bite to eat or drink and, stretch their legs out.
From what you know about this, I mean, were you familiar with this rest stop? Just
Oh
being
yeah,
living in the
I've
general, were
worked.
you were familiar with it?
Oh yes, sir. I've been through there numerous times. The profession I've chosen in my life has taken me through that direction more times than I could probably count.
Okay. Would you say that's a very busy highway, a very busy rest stop from your experience?
Yes, sir. It's right off the main interstate in Wyoming, which is I-25. So it's a very very busy interstate, and it's a very busy rest stop.
How far would you say this was from where Renee and Josh lived together?
Um, Probably about an hour and a half.
So it's not close. Hour and a half, maybe 75 miles to 90 miles, maybe something like that. Not close. The car's found there. Would this have been a place, let's just say, for example, that she might have stopped and was I guess I should ask you this. Is this also a situation where there's like rest stops on each side of the highway for both north and south headed, cars that are headed each direction, or is there just one rest stop there for both directions?
At this particular one, there's just one rest stop,
All right.
and it would be on the southbound side.
Okay. So she stops there. Maybe she has to go to the bathroom. It's possible that something happened. We're going to get into that in a bit. Are there many like 18-wheelers that travel this? Would you find 18-wheelers? If we were to go out there right now, would we find 18-wheelers maybe parked there at night?
You'd find 12, 13 of them parked there at least every night.
Okay. All right. So we have a situation where it's possible she parked there. She did take off. She parked there. Maybe something happened. Maybe she went willingly to leave her life. Maybe. Um, when the phone and the phone was found, do you know if it was pinged to determine if she went directly from the house to there? Were her phone records ever checked to see if she made any phone calls after you or your mother talked to her?
It was a pay-as-you-go phone, so there were no records to it
Yeah.
besides whatever was on the phone itself. But as far as I know, the PD and stuff like that didn't do any pings or anything like that. That'd be something they'd reserve if it was somebody important to them.
Do you know if she had any credit cards or anything that might have? You said everything was left in the car, but is there any proof that she might have stopped anywhere between where she lived, and that rest stop?
No, sir. There's no indication of anything like that.
And given that you just explained that this was like prairie land, there's no chance of her parking her car and walking out into the woods and getting lost, anything like that.
No, there's no chance. I mean, you can see for miles from that rest stop. I mean, literally, you can just look and see miles and miles.
Because I'm sure that a lot of people are going to say, well, they think of rest stops, they think like they sit off the road and there's many trees, like a tree lined highway. Of course, me being from living in Florida now, being from Pennsylvania, that's how our rest stops are here, where you could easily just walk off into the woods, but not what you're saying. So that's just not possible that she could have just walked away.
No, sir, nothing like that around there.
Were the police ever able, or you or your family or anybody else in the last 14 years, ever to find anybody who saw the car pull in, saw the car parked there, anybody around the car? Has any information like that popped up in the last 14 years?
No, sir, none. There were a few people that had tried to call and say that they had been talking to my sister. And as soon as they had done that, the PD had questioned them, and it wound up being false.
So this busy rest stop, and still nobody kind of saw anything. Never saw the car pull in. Of course, it'd be hard. People traveling, maybe to Montana or down to Colorado or to Idaho. They might not even known that they even saw something, but Nothing, ever anything in the last 14. No witnesses of any kind.
No, sir.
Did you get the car back, or what happened to the car after they towed it away? Did they do any forensics on it?
I don't think they did any forensics. I think maybe they had, done fingerprints or something like that, but that had been the most of it. There was no, as they had told us, there was no visible evidence of a struggle or anything like that in the vehicle.
And what happened to the car after the police were done with it? Did Josh get possession of it, or was it being financed? Did it go back to a bank? What happened to it?
It was actually my mother's car.
Hmm.
My mom had bought it a number of years before for my stepdad to get back and forth to work, and it had gone back to my mom. And it,
So she continued to drive it. You had a chance, I guess, maybe to look over it after the police did.
Yeah. Actually, after my mom got it back, I was using it. I used it for probably 6 months.
That had to be a little. Can I just ask? Was that a little creepy to you?
It was. It felt just very strange, just being in my sister's car, because me and her had switched off who had it at what point in times.
And you knew that possibly that this was the car that your sister disappeared in.
Yes, sir. It
And
did make it very hard.
I'm sure. I'm sure. Once again, the police did check it. There were no signs of violence, no like carpet ripped out of it, no, frankly, just blood stains, anything that couldn't be identified. Just a regular car, just sitting right there in the rest stop uh, with just a car sitting there. That's all it was.
Yes, sir.
What did Josh have to say about all this? Did you ever have a chance to talk to him personally? Did your mother talk to him? Of course, we know what his story is, that she took off on August 10th, got maybe fed up with him, possibly didn't want to be a mother anymore. I guess you could possibly believe that he drove out to, or she drove out to that rest stop. Maybe she's driving somewhere and gets out and jumps in with a guy in an 18-wheeler. It's possible. I guess stranger things have happened, but did Josh offer up any theories regarding that?
He had actually given the police 3 different stories of what had happened, from what I had understood.
And do you know what those 3 stories are?
I don't per se. The police were pretty hush-hush toward it about me, or toward me. They really didn't divulge any information to me myself because it was an unsolved case, is how they were describing it to me.
Then how did you know that there were 3 stories? Did they at least tell you that?
Yeah, they had told me that he had switched, like, how stuff went down. He had switched it up 3 different times, is what they had told us, and they were investigating him.
But we should say for the record, as of March 27th, 2018, he is a free man walking around somewhere in Wyoming. To your knowledge, has he ever spent any time in jail for anything since August of 2004?
Not to my knowledge, no.
Okay. Was he ever given a lie detector test regarding that day? No.
No, there were no lie detector tests given.
Have you ever had an opportunity to ask the police the reason for that? Because, I mean, that's fairly common, even in cases where you don't even have a very good suspect. And of course, Josh is a person of interest in this case. We talked a lot about a lot of lie detector test results on this program. Any reason that you think Josh hasn't been given one?
Yeah, actually, his family, like I said before, is very well set into the community of Torrington area. They own a lot of property and business front and stuff like that. So it's one of those you scratch my back, I scratch your back communities.
So maybe he's in a position where the cops have just kind of let that slide, even though you say that they were looking at him back then.
Yeah. It's very possible in Wyoming.
Okay. Since 2004, has he ever said anything to anybody? Has he talked to you about Renee's disappearance? Talked to your mother? Anybody else in your family Frankly, did he seem very upset that she disappeared?
No, he was not upset at all. Only thing he was concerned about was his son. That was the only thing he had any care for.
And let's talk about that. He and Renee had one son together, but of course there were three other children that weren't Josh's that were in that house. What happened after Renee disappeared? What did he do?
He instantly sent the other three kids to foster care. Took his son and went and lived with his family.
So he vacated the house that he and Renee were living in. Or apartment? Were they renting, or what was the situation there with their living conditions?
It was a rental home.
Renting the home. And how soon after Renee disappeared did Josh do this with these children?
It was almost instantly that DFS came into play and took the kids.
So even, would you say even before August 2004 was over?
Yeah.
So like within the...
I'd say within a week.
Within a week, that fast. That fast.
If not sooner.
It's, I guess we could look at it this way, that he got rid of those children very quickly, and it was still very possible that Renee could just show back up on his doorstep like a week later saying, well, I just decided to go down to Vegas for a week or something.
Yeah.
I got in a truck at an 18-wheeler, cruised across the United States with some guy, came back. She could have come back, and she would have come back to an empty house, nobody living in it, and three of her children in foster care.
Yeah.
Did you ever see him personally, in person, after Renee disappeared? And I'm guessing you haven't seen him personally recently, but back then.
No. Basically, the PD had informed me I need to stay away from him and his family.
Did something happen that they instructed you to do that? I'll just ask you point blank, John. Did you or somebody else in your family maybe make some comments that could be construed to mean that you might harm him in some way if you ran into him? Just be honest.
No, not for
Just be
a
honest.
long time. After about a year or two of her being missing, I had contacted the Torrington PD itself, myself, and was talking with the detective in charge. And I mean, they had done nothing for the case. So I had informed them, well, would you like me to go down and question them for you guys myself and get the truth out of them? I mean, after so many years of just frustration of nothing and the PD just basically washing everything under the board, it just got under my skin.
Right, as it does with many families. Sure.
It was well before this that they told us, you don't need to mess with them.
Did you have a chance, being that Josh wasn't talking, did you have a chance to talk to any of Renee's friends? Did she have any women friends who she might have been talking to at this time? You had a chance, did they offer up any explanations or anything like that around this time?
I was only friends and knowledgeable of like two or three of her friends. And the three of them were one lady, her boyfriend, and her sister. And I had actually been living with them in July before my sister disappeared. And they had been telling me the same thing I already knew, that Josh had been beating her.
And did they, after Renee disappeared, did they offer up any opinion? That's all it would be, an opinion or a theory as to what could have happened.
Everybody came up with the same theory as what our family had, was Josh had been threatened that she was going to take his son, and he decided to put an end to it.
Is there any reason that those children went to foster care instead of back? I mean, I have to ask this, maybe just clarify something. She had three other children. Were they all to the same man, or two separate men, or?
All four children, all four different dads.
Okay. Is there a reason that those three other children just couldn't be taken to the men who were their fathers? Any insight into that?
My oldest niece, we never knew who her dad was. So there was, it was just a mind boggle on that one. My nephew Jonathan, his dad, we knew who he was, but he's not exactly a stable parent. That wouldn't ever be considered a stable parent.
Okay.
And then Angel, my youngest niece, it took her father 3 years of fighting with DFS to get custody of his daughter.
Right. Right. And that was Chris that we've already mentioned. We're going to talk about, once again, we're going to talk about him in a bit, right? That would be Chris.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And you know him fairly well.
I've known him for many years.
Okay. To your knowledge, this rest stop, what is the nearest town to this rest stop on that highway?
That would be Wheatland, Wyoming.
Wheatland. Just to ask you this, does Josh or anyone in his family know anybody that lives in that town? Is there a reason that if something did happen, the car would have been parked there?
I do know that Josh has a sister that lives over there. I don't know much about her or anything like that, but I do know he has a sister that lives in Wheatland.
So she kind of, and how far would you say is Wheatland from this rest stop?
Probably about 10, 15 miles.
Because if we're going to believe that something happened to Renee by Josh or anybody and the car was, let's just say it ditched there, it's not like that person could just walk off. They're probably going to need to be picked up by somebody, probably.
Yeah,
so
there's no way for somebody just to walk off from a truck stop that far in the middle of nowhere.
After Renee disappeared, did you keep tabs on Josh? Did he jump into another relationship right away? I've heard that he's a very, very private guy. Did he jump into a new relationship, or?
He did within a couple of months. He had gotten with a lady there in Torrington. I don't know her name. I've tried repeatedly myself to get information, and it's come up as a zilch for me.
He didn't kind of grieve too long. He moved on with his life fairly quickly, especially when the kids are concerned.
Yeah.
And to your knowledge, did he ever say anything to anybody about why he gave those 3 children up so quickly?
They weren't his kids. He had literally no attachment to them.
Even though they had been living under the same roof as he and Renee for a while.
Yeah, he did none of the parenting with them kids. It was all my sister.
Okay. And what kind of job did Josh have during this time?
At that time, he was a mechanic.
Like working at a car dealership or working on trucks, something like that?
Working at a car garage.
We had mentioned Chris. You are friends with him, so I'm going to ask you to be as objective as you can regarding this. He was the father of the daughter, Angel, who lives with you now just recently. Did he keep in contact with Renee while she was with Josh, or how did that work? How do you remember that working?
Yeah, they did have contact with each other for the sake of Angel. They did communicate and co-parent together. As far as I ever seen, they co-parented rather well.
Do you believe, and I'm just going to have to just ask you this, is this a situation where she might have ditched Josh, and being that Chris was, a guy that she had a child with, of course, she knew that you two would probably were still friends at the time. Is it possible that she could have packed up everything and went to his house that day or that evening?
No, because Chris lived in the same town that we lived in. He was living in Douglas.
Okay, so it's in the complete opposite direction of where her car was found at the rest stop.
Yes, sir.
And would still run into the same situation that if somebody ditched the car there, Chris, if he would be a person of interest, would also once again have to find somebody to pick himself up there.
Yes, sir.
So it's still fairly complicated. But he and Renee, he couldn't have been too pleased that his daughter went back to foster care after Renee disappeared. That was a big issue for him, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. He fought tooth and nail. He hired an attorney and Holton Yards, and it still took him 3 years to get his daughter back.
All right. So he would not be considered a very good suspect in this case, even as an ex-boyfriend, just because of all the problems it caused for him when Renee disappeared. It was actually easier for him when she was still around.
Yeah.
Right. He wouldn't have had to get an attorney. He wouldn't have had to do all this fighting. They had whatever arrangement that they had, and he had to fight to get his daughter back after this happened. Of course, this was 14 years ago. And I guess you personally, at any point since 2004, do you think that it was possible, even though you're friends with him, that Chris had anything to do with this?
I personally don't think he had anything to do with it. I really don't.
Okay. Now, you had said that she had I guess the son Jonathan, taking your name, with a guy who was a little less than stable. Have you ever thought about the possibility that he had anything to do with this?
No, he wasn't. He's been in another. I think he's been in Seattle. I think.
Okay, so he wasn't even in the area when Renee disappeared.
No, nowhere near.
No, not even in the same state. And just to remind everybody, the Renee's oldest child, uh, you weren't even sure who the father was, so we can't even consider him a suspect if we don't know who he is.
Yeah, and he had nothing to do with my sister or his daughter. Her entire life.
Okay. Now there is something tragic that goes along with this. Is that oldest daughter? She's not with us anymore, is she?
No, sir. She had grandma seizures since she was approximately 12 or 13. And this last fall, she had a massive seizure, and it took her from us.
Wow. So your sister is gone, and then you lose a niece.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Wow. Did you know your niece very well?
For a number of years, when my sister was still unstable, me and my mother had basically raised my niece. We had her for, I'd say, 2 or 3 years. Her and Angel, or no, her and Jonathan. Before Angel was around.
And so you knew her very well, and that had to be very difficult for you. So last fall, you're saying like September, October of 2017, she passed away.
Yes, sir. And it was very hard.
Now, there is something out there that we need to talk about regarding all of this, and these are, and you do know some, at least a little bit about this. Um, there are anonymous calls that are attached to Renee's disappearance. Why don't you explain to the listeners when that started, how it started, and you actually know what was going on here? Why don't you talk about all of that and tell the listeners what you know?
Well, the PD had started getting phone calls from a young lady in Torrington. Her name was Jennifer. It was a lady I dated for a while. And from my understanding, she had been hanging around Josh Minter. And the PD had gotten calls from her stating that she was in contact with my sister. And the PD had done an investigation with her and come to find out it was just false accusations.
So when did these start exactly? When did these calls start?
I'd say it was probably a month after my sister disappeared.
So in September 10th, around then of 2004, who was she calling? Was she calling the police? Was she calling you? What was going on there exactly? Who was she calling?
She had called me a couple of times and stated it, and just how she had stated everything, just it didn't sound like my sister at all. She'd tell me that my sister called her and told her to tell me she's fine, she's here, she's safe. Don't worry about her. And the thing that made it completely unbelievable for me was the fact that no statements whatsoever of the kids.
And was this maybe I should ask you this first. This was a girl that you actually went out with once or twice?
I dated her for about 2 weeks.
Okay. So you just went out a couple times and maybe she wasn't to your liking. She sounds a little kooky, but how long was this? Did were you and she an item, I guess, for 2 weeks before Renee disappeared?
This was probably a couple years before my sister disappeared that me and her had dated.
Okay. And did Renee know this girl?
She did know her, and my sister had no like whatsoever for her. My sister despised this young lady.
Okay. Would you Did Renee know this girl independently of you? Did they go maybe to school together? Did they work together?
Oh
Any?
no, she's even younger than I am.
Okay, so the only reason that Renee knew this girl was through you.
Yes, sir. Yeah, that's how she originally met her. And then, as far as I know, some mutual friends of mine and my sisters had met her and befriended her, and just bad news bear.
But then, at some point, how did she and Josh Minter get to know each other? If Renee couldn't stand her and Renee is with Josh, do you have any idea how she ended up being, knowing Josh? I guess the way she got to know him.
They had both grown up in Torrington, and Torrington's a very small community. Basically, know everybody that lives there. They had, from what I understood, just what I understood, not firsthand experience. They had been seeing each other, but I'm not, I can't say for sure.
Okay, and you did say that Josh moved on with his life fairly quickly, not just with the kids, but with his personal life fairly quickly after Renee disappeared.
Yes,
And
sir.
she starts making these calls like a month later to you, and saying that she was in contact with Renee. And you passed this on to the police, and that's how they figured out uh, who was making these calls. I guess they weren't necessarily anonymous then, were they?
No, they weren't anonymous. And it was a number of people that had reported to the PD that she was calling them, stating that she had contact with my sister. As far as I remember, she even put a post on Facebook about it.
Do you think that this was, being that you knew her and went out with her a little bit, you knew her? Do you think that this was just herself trying to assert herself into the story? Do you think that she was losing her mind? Or do you think that there was somebody behind the scenes who was egging her on to do this? What are your impressions all these years later?
To a point, I think there was somebody else egging her on to try to get directions mixed up for an investigation, like pointing the finger in this direction so it goes away from me type of thing.
That would make sense. The police did go talk to her. What was her explanation for doing this?
I never talked with the police directly about what she had said, but what they did tell me was that she had admitted that her statements were false.
And was she fined? Did she have to do any community service? Were there any charges filed against her regarding these lies?
No, it's one of those things that, oh, you're just lying, you're full of crap, go away.
And have you ever, being that you knew her, have you ever run into her? You still live in Wyoming. Have you ever run into her since that time?
No,
Anything?
sir,
Any?
I
Do
have
you have
not.
mutual friends? Anybody? Has she ever admitted to anybody that the motivation for what she was doing?
She never admitted to anybody the motivation behind it, but like I said, the mutual friend of my sister's and mine that knew her was what was her name? Virginia Schaefer was her name back then, and she never gave any reason to it, but she had admitted to numerous people that she was just lying.
Very strange story there. No, I'm not sure. 14 years later, you'd hope to. Where is this woman now? Is this somebody that if you wanted to tomorrow, could you jump in your car, whatever, go talk to her, and maybe 14 years later, she's a little older now, that maybe she could come to her senses and explain exactly what was going on or what's gone on with her life in the last 14 years?
I have no clue. I've had no contact with her since she had called me and telling me that my sister had been calling her.
Okay. Well, I'm just going to put this on the record. You might want to think about that, John. After 14 years, maybe, it sounds to me like she maybe was a very troubled young lady back then, but maybe 14 years later, she's cleaned her act up. She might be ready to talk about what was going on back then. Of course, on the other hand, maybe she's gotten just worse, but it might be a shot. So we'll have to think about that. Very strange circumstances, especially considering that this girl knew Josh. Um, there is a story out there also about a woman being found dead in Renee's house. Is that true?
Not to my knowledge.
because I had read that somewhere, and that's something maybe I'm going to have to look into a little bit more for my summation for this case. Not okay. So at this point, you being Renee's brother, you've never heard anything like that. Might just
No.
be some sort of hoax or something. Okay.
Well, Wyoming's full of what we call urban legends. And it's people that just make up stories, and that's a haunted house. There's a dead woman in there and stuff like that.
Are there any crimes, you've lived in Wyoming for a long time, before Renee disappeared and since? Are there any missing persons cases, just specifically, similar to this one in your area? Any other women missing like Renee in maybe the 5 years before she disappeared or any time since?
No, sir, not to my knowledge.
All right. We know that missing persons cases happen in all the states in the United States and all over the world. But in Wyoming, and there are some missing persons cases I've read about besides Renee's in Wyoming, but nothing that is like this one.
No, sir.
What do you think happened to your sister, John?
My personal opinion of it is, she had already told me and my mom that, she's leaving him and she's moving back with our family. My opinion would be he caught her packing up and he put a stop to it because he didn't want to lose his kid.
And I have to ask you this, being that Josh moved out of that house so quickly afterwards, did anybody, the person who owned the house, if it was being rented, anybody go into that house and ever do any forensics on the house after he moved out?
Not to my knowledge. As far as I know, there was never any forensics done to the house itself.
Does that house still exist? Is it still standing where it is?
I honestly do not know. It's been many of years since I've been back to Torrington. It just breaks me down to even go near that town.
Okay. Well, there's once again maybe something that you can do. You might be able to find who owned the house back then and ask them if somebody could come in and take, because if there's something that happened in that house, let's just say, if it was violent, let's just say, those signs would still be there. You can maybe put new carpet down and things like that, but there are signs, if you know what to look for, you can still find things that might, really stick out. Maybe to the people who have lived in it since, it might not seem unusual, but for you, your family, maybe a private investigator, because you know what to look for, something might have happened in the house, it might stick out to you, even though the people who live there don't know anything, of course, probably because they don't know that a person who lived in the house went missing from it. Once again, we're not going to get into any names, but since 2004, you, of course, have an opinion about what happened to your sister. Whoever might have done this, if she did not disappear on your own, somebody caused her to disappear, might have needed help. Do you have an idea who could have helped Josh do something like this? And I don't want any names. We're not going to say any names. Do you have an idea?
The only person I could think of that would have helped him would have been somebody to pick him up from the rest stop and take him back home. And that would have been his sister.
And do you know did you ever meet his sister? Did you know her very well? Did Renee ever talk about her?
Not really. I never met her myself. My sister really didn't have the greatest opinion of her, much less any of his family. They're all pretty much nose up in the air, I'm better than you are.
And did, once again, I've heard that Josh is a very private person. Are there any guys, friends of his, who could have assisted him in this?
He had few friends. Very few friends. And, I had never met any of his friends. Everything was so secretive about him that my family and I knew next to nothing about him besides who his family was.
So Josh, Renee's boyfriend / fiance at the time, he claims to have been the last person to see Renee. He claims that she packed up, got in the car, left, and the car was found at the rest stop. And as far as we know, even though it seems very strange, his story holds up to scrutiny because the car was found, there was stuff found in it, and all of her stuff was found in it. And it's very possible that she might have driven it out there herself, even though uh, maybe something else happened. What's it been like for the last 13 and a half years? It'll be 14 years in August this year. What's it been like for you? What's it been like for the rest of your family? And you know, explain that to the listeners if you can.
Well, it's been really hard. Like I said, me and my sister, out of all my siblings, we were the closest. It's been very hard for me and my mom. It weighed extremely hard on my stepfather. He came into our family when we were all really young, and he was just always there for all of us. So it weighed heavy on all of our hearts, and it affected us for a number of years, really bad. Severe trust issues. We don't trust very many people anymore. We keep to ourselves so much, and it's hard. It's one of those things, you lose somebody you love that you've always had with you, and it just tears you up inside.
Right, and since then, as you explained, you lost one of Renee's daughters to a seizure.
Yes, sir. We lost her. Yes, sir.
And I'm guessing that, of course, Angel lives with you now. And where is John now?
My nephew is in Washington State. He's up there living and working up there. He just got a job up there doing masonry work. He was the closest one to my sister, or to my niece Angel, or Maya. Sorry.
Okay.
They had gone to the same foster care for a number of years. They were in the same foster home. They still got to be raised together. My nephew went, and he just couldn't live with the people that they were living with. So he moved out, and my niece went to Alaska. And that's where she eventually wound up passing away at.
Oh, my. So John is doing okay then in the state of Washington?
As far as I've understood, he's doing pretty good. He's keeping himself out of trouble. He just works to survive, and he sticks to himself.
And of course, you have no relationship with the son that Josh and Renee had together.
No, I haven't seen that young man since July of that year when I left Torrington.
And so now, being if he was born in August of 2003, he'd be like 14 years old. He'd be like in 8th grade, something like that. And I know that we won't mention her name, but I know that there is a woman that you know that is really, who's not a member of the family, who has really headed up some of this, really digging into Renee's disappearance. I'm not going to mention her name, but she is how you and I, of course, came to talk. So
Yes,
you've
sir.
had people outside your family who have come, to help your family in trying to figure out what happened.
Yes, sir. And they're some of the most amazing people I've ever had the blessing of talking to and getting to know.
Right. It's good to have people like that. Good to have people on your team, even if they're not family members, but they get interested and they want to help you out. We run into that in a lot of the cases, and it's good to hear. It's good to hear. John, is there like a Facebook page or anything out there, a website that people can go to find out more about Renee and her disappearance?
We did have a Facebook page set up for her a number of years ago, but Facebook, I guess, said that it wasn't allowed because it's not a living person anymore, or a person's actual account.
Huh.
So they said we had to delete that account.
Okay, well, I would think about there are plenty of missing persons pages on Facebook. I would urge you or some of your family, maybe this, of course, this person that you and I know that is a friend of the family, might want to do that. Raise the profile of Renee's disappearance a little bit. I realize that they don't like missing people's regular pages up there, but a page devoted to a missing person. And if it's an unsolved case, they certainly support that on Facebook. Anything else? Anywhere else? I know she's on Charlie Project on Namus. Anywhere else that Renee can be found out? Maybe I should ask you this. Have there been any local stories done on Renee's disappearance recently?
No, sir.
Okay, well, you might want to think about
it's one of those things that's been, swept under the rug by so many people that it's just a sore thumb for most people, and honestly for the family, it's more heartbreak than what we can really take anymore.
Yes, well, I'm hoping that Unfound's listeners hear this story, can identify with you, can identify with Renee, and have to hope that somebody out there may know something. I continue to think about her car being parked there. If this is a red stop that's fairly busy, just hold out the idea that somebody saw something and they just maybe don't even realize it. Possibly.
It would be amazing if somebody did have something, because after all these years, just a little bit of closure on what happened to my sister would, it would take so much off of us.
John, any last words before we complete this interview?
No, sir, not really. You guys have, honestly been a blessing, just the fact that, there's people out there that care and, still want the truth of what happened.
We certainly want the truth. That is certainly true. The truth. We want to get the information out there. We want to get the facts out there. And on Unfound, we don't allow these people to be forgotten. 10 years, people who've disappeared 10 years ago, 20 years ago, whatever. That's the reason we do what we do. It's the reason we love to have family members like yourself on this program. And I appreciate you being on this episode of Unfound.
Thank you so much, Ed.
You're welcome. And that was my interview with John Yeargain, brother of Renee Yeargain. I thank him for joining me and all of you on this episode. A couple clarifications and additions from the interview. First, the clarifications. The rest area we were talking about where Renee's car was found is between Torrington and Cheyenne on Route 85. It's called the Meridian Rest Stop. It's accessible to both northbound and southbound traffic. It's on Google Maps, and you'll be able to see how remote it is. Also, at the time of her disappearance, Renee was 24 years old. John said 27. I think I kind of put him on the spot with that question. And as John stated during the interview, he was having his own set of personal issues at the time of Renee's disappearance. And the additions. I stated in the interview I got some information from another person who knew Renee at the time she was dating Josh. On good authority, I found out that Josh, before he dated Renee, stalked another girl for quite a while. I don't know if she feared for her life, but she wanted him to go away, and he wouldn't. And this girl was stunned to later find out that Renee was dating Josh. The other piece of information John and I didn't talk about was Renee allegedly having bipolar disorder. I believe this to be true. However, there is no proof she had any problems with this disease close to when she disappeared. As was stated in the interview and in the conversation I had with someone else who knew Renee, those 6 months before she disappeared were very positive, with Renee finally seeing some ways to be less dependent. Yes, if she was on some type of bipolar medication and didn't take it, then anything is possible in regards to her actions and choices. But neither Josh nor anyone else has ever stated she wasn't acting herself before she disappeared. With that, I'll leave the theorizing up to you. And that's the program. If you found it informative, please go to the app that you use to listen to Unfound and give this podcast a 5-star review. I thank you for listening. I'm Ed Densel, and you've been listening to Unfound.